Hey everyone, RogueGold here, and today, the shoe has finally dropped. The speculation about Ubisoft's fate as a company and just what is going to happen with everything involving Ubisoft has been running wild for months now. People have been talking about the potential for a total buyout of the entire Ubisoft company, them putting up all of their different IPs and franchises on auction. Some have said the company is just full on going to shut down and immediately close all development in games, right? There's been endless amounts of rumors. Throughout that time, I was incessantly asked to cover all of this stuff, right? And all along, I said I will cover it once there is tangible news and updates to actually talk about, right? An actual change in direction for the company that directly involves the division. And that is today, my friends. That has now finally happened. Now, along that path, many people fear the worst for the division, right? People saying that the Division 3 was going to get canceled and they were just, again, going to drop all development on the games. Others had hoped for some improvement. If the IP were to go to a different publisher other than Ubisoft, people hope that maybe that would lead to increased amount of investment and prioritization. Honestly, after this news, I think we landed kind of in the middle of the road. This is far from the worst outcome, but it's not really the best either. And more or less, I expect things to relatively stay the same moving forward. But that said, I want to break down what exactly was announced for Ubisoft and specifically focus on the facts and what it means for the Division franchise, which is, of course, at least here on this channel, what we all care about. So, without further ado, let's get to it. Alright, so in case you have not heard about any of this stuff, which seems impossible at this point, but the context here is that over the past 2 years, Ubisoft has been struggling. Frankly, their stock prices have continued to decline over time, the confidence that investors have had has gone down and down and down, and basically it became clear to business advisors and analytics that some kind of corporate restructuring was going to need to be done to right the ship, and essentially just revitalize all things Ubisoft. That has now happened. Now, I just want to give you one very clear disclaimer here before we get into this. I am not a business or finance major in any sort of way. I can report you the news and give you my perspective, but I'm not an expert in this field, so please keep that in mind. Alright, so the news of all of this broke yesterday on March 27th. Ubisoft put out a press release and basically just announced this news. Many outlets then covered it. You've maybe read articles from those different sources, but I say let's just go straight to the original source and I will give you my thoughts. Alright, so here is the official press release that was put out by Ubisoft. It is a, 3-page document here with a bunch of different numbers and business terms and all that stuff. Again, we just want to focus on the top-level facts. Here's the title. Ubisoft accelerates its transformation by laying foundation for new operating model with the creation of a subsidiary and injection of $1.16 billion of cash from selected investor Tencent. So let's read right at the top here. March 27th, 2025. Today, Ubisoft announced that it is accelerating its transformation by taking an important step in rapidly evolving its operating model with the creation of a dedicated subsidiary based on its Assassin's Creed, Far Cry, and Tom Clancy's Rainbow Six brands. Following the formal and competitive selection of process blah 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 blah, Tencent will invest a $1.16 billion investment for a minority stake in the new subsidiary. The new subsidiary will focus on building game ecosystems designed to become truly evergreen and multi-platform. Backed by investment, boosted by creative capabilities, it will further increase quality in narrative solo experiences, expand multiplayer offerings with increased frequency of content release, and introduce free-to-play touchpoints, integrate more social features, all of that stuff. So again, I know that as a lot of terms there in jargon. Basically what has happened is that Ubisoft has taken 3 of those IPs, Assassin's Creed, Far Cry, and Rainbow Six. Those IPs and franchises are now owned and operated by a separate company and entity rather than the Ubisoft as we know it, right? There is this new subsidiary, a new company, that is still majoritarily owned by Ubisoft, but it also has huge stake in it by Tencent, as this outlines, and they've left the door open for other stakeholders to come in and put stakes in as well, basically making it a very competitive new company. Now, on the surface at least, that is pretty good news for Assassin's Creed, Far Cry, and Rainbow Six, because that means that they are getting this huge cash injection of over $1 billion from Tencent, and this new company, they say it right here, has been valued at an estimation of $4 billion total, right? There is a lot of value that investors are seeing within this new company. But what does that mean for the rest of Ubisoft's library and IP, namely, for us, the Division? Well, if we scroll down here, they answer that exact question. It says, in parallel to the creation of this new entity, right, that new company, Ubisoft itself, the Ubisoft we already know and that exists, will focus on nurturing the development of iconic franchises, including Tom Clancy's Ghost Recon and The Division, accelerating the growth of top-performing titles and leveraging disruptive technologies on selected new IPs while continuing to deliver state-of-the-art production game engines and online services. More details on the group's future operating model will be shared at a later stage. So, for everybody who was thinking that just because this new company has been spun up with these new IPs that everything else is going by the wayside and going away, that's not true. As they say right here, the existing Ubisoft as we know it is still going to be around, and among other things, it is going to focus on nurturing the development of franchises like Ghost Recon and The Division. What exactly does that mean, however? Let's talk about it. Alright, so the bottom line news from this for Division fans, like we were just saying, is that for people who are worried about The Division getting cancelled out of nowhere, they state right in their press release that Ubisoft plans on nurturing and growing the IP. It's not going anywhere, at least in the immediate future. And I think part of what many people forget when they talk about how Division is like on the brink of going away at any time, Massive Entertainment, which again is the development studio of The Division, they are one of these studios that Ubisoft, the publisher, owns. Among Ubisoft's portfolio, Massive has a decent amount of sway in the company. They're kind of insulated from some of this other instability that goes on around them. And why I say that actually isn't hugely related to their games, right? Even though Avatar, Frontiers of Pandora, and Star Wars Outlaws didn't really reach their full revenue potentials, or what I think, Ubisoft was expecting or hoping from those games. Regardless of that, Massive actually has a pretty huge technological stake within the company, and that's for a few reasons. For one, they of course lead and house the development teams for the Snowdrop game engine that was initially created for The Division 1 way back in the day, but it has now become a company-wide engine that many different games under the Ubisoft umbrella use. If you didn't know, Massive also leads the Ubisoft Connect development and infrastructure, right? Anytime you go and use the Ubisoft launcher on PC to access any of their games, and we're also talking about the in-game integration with different rewards and challenges, the team that builds and runs all of that stuff is at Massive. And so in many ways, with those things alongside the games that they make, they're kind of the backbone of modern Ubisoft production. And I think that means that unless they were to bring along some sort of catastrophic revenue loss or bad press for the overall company, which they haven't, as much as some people may want to tell you, then there's not too many reasons for Ubisoft corporate to disrupt what they're currently doing. The quote in that press release also mentions the existing Ubisoft company alongside nurturing Ghost Recon and The Division, leveraging disruptive technologies on selective new IPs. We know that Massive is likely working on an all-new IP alongside The Division 3, that being because they're currently hiring a lot of positions for an unannounced project, and it's very unlikely that Avatar or Star Wars is getting a direct sequel. So not only are they probably a part of that new IP plan, but also in the technologies part of that quote, Massive is also a contributor to work on the new scalar technology. If you don't know what that is, I made a video on that, a few months back. It's a pretty interesting new concept that Ubisoft is going for that could even be integrated into games like The Division 3. But yeah, as I said, across the board, Massive has pretty big stake in Ubisoft's modern day operations. And so from a logistical and objective perspective, there's really no indication of any major shakeups coming to The Division or Massive in terms of their projects, and subsequently also not a huge reason for them to do any layoffs to the studio. Of course, those things could change, right? Anything could happen in the future, but for right now, with the indicators that we have, those simply don't exist. So, going back to the announcement of this new subsidiary with Assassin's Creed, Far Cry, Rainbow Six, I've seen so far a lot of people express disappointment over the fact that Division is not included in this new subsidiary with Tencent. And to that, I would say I think it is honestly a 50-50 split of good and bad. On the bad side, what Ubisoft has now come out and said is that plain as day, they see Assassin's Creed, Far Cry, and Rainbow Six as their most important and profitable IPs under their umbrella. And there's pretty much no question that this new subsidiary is going to get the priority for investment and development, right? Both in terms of what Ubisoft itself is putting into it, but also what the likes of Tencent and other potential stakeholders in the future want to get out of it in return, right? Because it's all about money. It's all about the monetary investment and return, right? So that's one downside, is that Division is clearly not included in this party that is going to get a lot of attention and funding. At the same time, however, I was never somebody personally who wanted Tencent involved in The Division, right? For the past several months when there were rumors of Tencent like buying out Ubisoft outright, there were a lot of people who were saying, oh, I really hope that Tencent gets control of the Division IP and they can kind of, right, do a different direction with it. From what I know and from what you can see in their patterns, Tencent tends to come with a lot of greater creative decision clashes with direct studios and developers, and they very often push for heavier and more predatory forms of monetization in their games. And so look, moving forward, even though I now expect Assassin's Creed, Far Cry, and Rainbow Six to get cool stuff like more and faster game updates, more games overall, I also fully expect to see those brands become more diluted in their identity, and that all of this likely may come at the cost of the quality of those games, and you're going to see them at higher higher prices, there's going to be more monetization, because while greater investment and funding is great, now all of the pressure and attention is going to be on this new subsidiary. And those developers are absolutely going to feel that in terms of the timeline that they have to make these games, what sort of expectations there are from the stakeholders of what these games need to include. And so, to the very best of my knowledge and understanding from all of this, virtually nothing is changing with the division in terms of creative control, because Tencent didn't increase its stake in the base Ubisoft company, which, as the press release stated, is where the division IP still remains. And so what I would not be shocked to see moving forward is if Massive actually gets a bit more of the reins back as time progresses, that of course being so long as the game remains profitable. Because what this new subsidiary does is that it creates less pressure for like every Ubisoft brand to overperform to try and save the company, and in turn hopefully that can lead to more breathing room for these individual developers, in our case Massive with the division, to do what is right for the game. I know some people out there like to say that Massive is the problem with the division, but frankly, and I've said this all along and believed it since day one, I think that Massive is the division. They are the ones who made this franchise and made these open worlds distinctly unique, with their world building, with the technology that these games have brought, all of it. You couldn't just hand the Division IP off to any other game developer in the world and have them replicate that kind of uniqueness and individuality. And so while one of the downsides of this whole transaction is that we might see less readily available support studios for the Division 3 or other projects, because many of those have now gone off to the subsidiary, with Ubisoft getting, what do they say, like a $1.25 billion cash injection from Tencent, that may eventually trickle down to Massive and the Division, not necessarily in terms of funding, but just in terms of company stability. And again, I'm really glad that no additional external pressure from Tencent is coming our way. I really don't think that is what we needed as a gamer community. And you don't have to look far. Look at the Chinese version of the Division 2. That has heavy Tencent involvement and is largely run by them as far as I know. And while they do get a lot of new content and concepts, whenever I see stuff from that game, gameplay, new features, whatever, it doesn't really feel like the Division. I mean, hell, they copied Destiny and you have like a floating ghost with you that can revive you and all this crazy stuff. There's like full-on samurai armor sets that glow and do all this crazy stuff. Again, it's flashy, it feels cool, but it's not Division. And so with Massive retaining the rights and overall creative control for the franchise that we know, I really don't think that's as bad of a thing as some people might make it out to be. However, at the end of the day, with this change, the exact same executive leadership is still in place that has been there for the past however many years. The same leadership that let the Division kind of stagnate to where it is today. So while I simultaneously am glad that Tencent is not more involved, I also don't foresee this changing really anything big overnight. And so that's more or less why I said in the intro that the worst outcome did not come from all of this, right? The Division is still in place. They're still working on the Division 3, but this also isn't like the most ideal thing ever. Because aside from some things changing behind the scenes that we likely won't even be aware of, I honestly don't expect all that much to change moving forward. So, that is all I have for this video, my friends. It honestly feels like a huge relief and weight off of the shoulders to finally have this news and confirmation. Hopefully, I can now stop seeing the "don't you know Ubisoft is shutting down next month" kind of comments on my videos every single day. I'm definitely very curious to see what happens with this all moving forward. Again, it is relieving to know that the Division is relatively safe for now. But with everything that we went over in this video, I would be very curious to get your guys' thoughts on it. Again, I'm no business expert. If any of you are who are listening to this and you have greater insights or perspective that you want to share on the whole thing, I would love to read that down below. And yeah, we will see where things go from here. If you enjoyed the video and you want to stay up to date on everything with the Division, including game updates, but also company-wide stuff like we talked about today, then I hope you will consider clicking that subscribe button if you've not already. But that is just about all I have for this one. Thank you all so much for watching. I'll see you soon. Until then, RogueGold. Ow.